was automatically created for me. Preview environments, it's not really working well. Without really knowing much about Kubernetes, really thumbs up for instant cluster type of stuff. Everybody is using Kubernetes one way or another. Maybe you're experimenting with it, maybe you're running in production, but you almost certainly using Kubernetes somehow, or at least learning about it. And we already know how to run permanent environments. We know how to run staging, integration, production, clusters, environments. That's a known thing, more or less. Temporary environments are more flaky, still not really solved. The other day I created that video how to create preview environments, and you can see it, the link is somewhere there. But how about environments for development? Before we reach the phase where we create a pull request, how can I, as a developer, leverage Kubernetes to give me everything I need to work on my stuff, whatever that stuff is? Now, I already explored Gitpod, and you can see the link over there. Watch that video if you haven't. It's amazing. But Gitpod gives me, IDE and terminal and stuff like that, replaces my laptop. What I still don't have is a good way to create servers, let's say clusters or environments within clusters where I can deploy my stuff. And there are a couple of things that are very important when we work as developers. We need a cluster or an environment or a namespace or something where we can deploy our stuff, which might be our laptop, but hey, might not be. Might be a real cluster somewhere. We need our work to be separated from other people's work, right? At one moment we integrate with others, but while I'm working alone, I need my own environment, whatever that environment is. It needs to be very easy, right? I cannot expect everybody to start learning about Kubernetes, spend 3 years figuring out. No, it needs to be extremely easy. And it needs to be accessible, and this is important part, it needs to clean itself up. If I'm going to use real clusters to deploy my stuff that I'm developing before it reaches pull requests, before it reaches staging or whatnot, I probably do not want to waste money to run everything I ever deployed forever and ever. So I need to be able to, I need to start working, deploy this here, and then half an hour later, if I go for lunch, then maybe it should be shut down, right? So what we really need while developing in those early stages is a way to create dynamic environments for every person, for every project, for every single combination. And that needs to be temporary, easy, and it needs to clean itself up. Now, we can approach that problem by, creating namespaces. So some administrator can create a namespace for you and namespace for you, and everybody gets a namespace, and maybe every project gets a namespace, or maybe there is a permutation for every project, for every person gets a separate namespace. But that's extremely complicated to manage, and it's painful. It's going to be painful. Now, let's see if we can simplify that. Let's see if everybody can get a fraction of a cluster where they can deploy anything they want, and if that something is going to be very easy, if the learning curve is going to be very shallow, and if it will auto-clean itself. Let's see how we can do that. And today, for doing that, we're going to try something new. We're going to try a service called Okteto. Sounds weird. Anyways, we're going to see whether we can get our development environments, clusters, what's or not, using Okteto. And it's going to be free. That's a good thing. So let's dive in. Let's see Okteto in action and whether it can fulfill our needs for development environments. So before we dive into Okteto, what is it? Let's see, what is it? I have it written here. It says, empower developers to innovate and deliver cloud-native applications faster than ever. Now, that's a vague description. That's from their site. I don't like it. I will describe my need, my requirements, my desires, and we'll see later whether Okteto can give us that. Developers get preview environments without much fuss. So this is Okteto, or whatever it's pronounced, and I did a few things in advance. I registered already, and where is it? And I installed the CLI. I will put the links in the description together with, I will have a gist even with all the commands that I will run. But anyways, those are the two things I did in advance. I installed the CLI, and I registered in Okteto, and everything else we are going to do together. We are going to explore Okteto in 20 minutes or less and try to discover whether it can help us creating development environments. And in this context, I don't mean like what Gitpod is doing. Maybe, actually, we'll see. But more importantly, whether we can get clusters that we need to deploy our applications while developing, right? And trying them out and testing and doing what's not. We'll see. But anyways, this is Okteto in 20 minutes or less. The first thing I'm going to do is, you can guess probably, I'm going to log in. Hey, there we are. I'm going to use my GitHub account. And there we are. Now we are in Okteto, and what can we do? Actually, let me make this bigger for you. It's empty, and there is a big button saying deploy. Let's deploy an application and see what are we going to get. And it asks us for a Git repository. Yes, I want to deploy from a Git repository. It could be Helm chart. We're not going to do that today. And the address is going to be https github.com. Remember, all the commands and all the instructions are in a gist. Go to the description to get it. And the repository belongs to me, and it is Okteto demo. So I just specified the repo and telling Okteto, hey, this is the repository, you know what to do. Let's see whether Okteto really knows what to do. And now we need to be patient, right? Patience is a virtue. People say, I don't know, I was never patient enough. Anyway, there we are. It's almost there. It's waiting for output. It is creating the environment, and it already figured out. It is building the container image. It is installing the application and says Okteto pipeline successfully executed. That's it. My application is up and running, and I can view it in browser. I can do whatever I want to do. And all I did was just tell Okteto, hey, this is the repository. Go do something. And it figured out, it found out that there is a directory with some Kubernetes definitions. It found out where it is. It could be Helm, it could be customized. It basically auto-detects what we have and uses what is already in that repository. And I invite you to explore that repository later on in more detail yourself. But it figured it all out and just did the right thing. Now, let's switch to the terminal, because I cannot live without the terminal for too long. So I'm going to do Okteto login now from a terminal. Yeah, I'm logged in. Cool. It redirected me to the browser. It figured out that I'm already logged in. It configured my CLI, and now I can run Okteto namespace. That's a bit strange name. Basically, actually, it's not that strange. It will create a namespace in some cluster somewhere for this project only, or for me. We'll see. But first things first, let me export kubeconfig so that, just in case, I don't want to mess up with my real production kubeconfig. So export kubeconfig equals wherever I am right now /kubeconfig.yaml. Oh, that's a typo over there. It should be /. Excellent. Now, let's see what do we get with that, with the command Okteto namespace that was mentioned in the UI before. Okteto namespace. Ta-da-da-da. That's it. Now, you might be confused. What happened? What happened? Now, what happened really is that it configured kubeconfig to use the cluster that Okteto created somewhere, somehow for me. And we can see that with kubectl config view, right? This is Kubernetes config that was created for me. It basically tells my laptop, hey, this is the cluster you got to work on whatever you're working on right now, and go use it, right? I got the cluster for me, or a namespace within a cluster, or a segment of a cluster. Anyway, whatever I need for development. And I can confirm that by saying kubectl get all. Let's see, what do I have in that cluster that was automatically created for me. Here we are. I have a pod, a service, a deployment, and a replica set. Now, it could be more, it could be less. What matters is that this is the application that was deployed for me. When I told Okteto, hey, this is the Git repository, it found out some manifests and it deployed the application for me. Now, let's see more importantly, kubectl get ingresses. Not only that it deployed, but it created this address. Look at this guy here. It exposed my application to the outside world based on the name of the app, which is DevOps Toolkit, my username, which is vfarsec, and .cloud.okteto.net. And let's see actually now if I go to browser, if I open it, what will I have? This is the same address. This is my application. It is deployed. It is running somewhere in my cluster. I don't care. I don't need to care. It is all interconnected in a way. Now, what else can we do? Let's take a look at the deployment that was deployed for my app. kubectl describe deployment DevOps Toolkit. And we can see that it did everything it needed to do. This is my manifest. But it's not exactly as I defined, right? So it took the manifest from the Git repo that I initially told it to use, and then it built the image. It figured out, it found Dockerfile, it built the image, and it changed the image to this, right? So this was not part of my manifest. It was something else before. It was clever enough to understand that whatever I defined as the image should not be the one. It should use the one it built. So this is it replaced the image with whatever was built when I created the Okteto namespace. Now let's see how we can combine that with a bit more of local work, right? I'm now interacting from my laptop with some clustering cloud, right? That runs my applications, does everything. I got my cluster, or not a cluster, namespace in some cluster with just enough of what I really need. So let me clone the repository that we already told Okteto to use. So git clone, this is the same repo I used before, github.com/vfarsec/Okteto demo. So I'm cloning it locally, and if I go to Okteto demo, now I can say Okteto app. Okteto app. Now, what will this do? You will see actually what it will do. It will be a surprise. You might guess it, I guess. So it is now connecting my laptop with the pod inside of that cluster, inside of that namespace. Actually, it is creating a pod that will allow me to work fully remotely with that cluster. Basically, I am about to enter SSH in a way into the cluster, and it is synchronizing my files. So it is moving my files, not moving, copying my files from my laptop into that container. And once it's done, I should be able to directly work against the namespace, against the applications in that cluster without really doing much. So I'm going to fast forward to the end of this process. There we are. Now I am inside of a pod, inside of that cluster, and I can work as if I'm completely there, right? I can prove it to you. Let's say that I can go to the source code, to the src directory. I can list the files. I'm now inside of that cluster, and those are the same files that I cloned locally, right? It synchronizes what I have on my laptop with what is happening in cloud. I can list the processes, for example, with ps-aux. I'm now inside of that cluster, inside of a pod, inside of that cluster. Let's create a file. I'm going to touch something. I want to create a file in a remote cluster, in a pod running somewhere else, and see what is happening with my local files. So I created a file over there. I'm going to exit. I'm going to list the files that I have now on my laptop, and you can see that something is there. It synchronizes what is happening between my laptop and what is happening in a cluster. And that opens doors to some really funky things we can do. So we have two major components or things that we might want to potentially use with Okteto. One is to have a cluster or a namespace within a cluster available for any of our projects, for every person, independently of the others, to work without really depending on some infrastructure nonsense and what's not. So we got the cluster instantly, basically. And then we can work directly in that cluster, writing code, synchronizing between laptop and that cluster. Now, I like the first part. The first part is awesome. So it gives me a remote cluster preview, temporary clusters that I can use instantly, right? I can switch from one project to another, and I will always get a new, fresh namespace with everything I need inside. That's awesome. Now, it also tries to replace my local work with remote work. Like when I did Okteto up, it connected me to a pod running somewhere. But that's finicky. That doesn't work really well. So it's not that good at replacing my local development environment with something happening remote. Gitpod is much better for that. So local development, remote development, replacing one with another, it's not really working well. But getting instant cluster, instant namespace for whatever we need, that's absolutely amazing. So I really thumbs up for instant cluster type of stuff. Now let's see a bit more of how it really works. Let me output the Docker file that we explored it used, right? So this is the Docker file I'm using. It's Hugo app that has multi-stage builds. One is to compile the app and the other one is to create the final image. My application is defined in the Helm directory, right? Now for Okteto, it could be Helm, it could be customized, it could be pure Kubernetes, that's all good. But there are a few other things that I already had there that I didn't show you, right? Cut Okteto pipeline. Now, this is the pipeline I created in advance. Okteto could figure out by itself, in most cases, what to do. But if we create a Okteto pipeline, then we are guiding it towards what we really need. And in this case, I'm using Okteto build to create a new image, and that image is tagged as Okteto dev, DevOps toolkit, Okteto git commit, right? It's a naming convention, doesn't matter. And then I'm running Helm upgrade to install a new, to upgrade or install or upgrade Helm release of my application. So basically that is how Okteto knew what to do in my case, right? I just wrote a simple Okteto pipeline that tells it what to do, not much more. And there is that Okteto YAML file that provides specific information for my development environment. And I will show you that file here. Basically, it is telling Okteto, hey, the command that should be executed is sh whenever I do Okteto up to synchronize with that cluster. It should synchronize whatever is in my local directory on my laptop with the directory src in that development pod type of stuff. And there is no need for persistent volumes. So we have two things, right? Okteto YAML, which is this one, which defines if you want to use Okteto to work remotely, which I don't really recommend. I think that Gitpod is a better solution. And we have Okteto pipeline that tells Okteto how to deploy applications in those temporary clusters, which is absolutely awesome. And finally, what else could I do? Yeah, let me destroy the app from the UI first, so that we start over a bit. So actually I can show you another command there. But anyways, destroy. I'm going to destroy everything that was created so far, and we're going to start over and do the same thing, exactly the same thing, but from a terminal. Right? How can we accomplish the same result as what I initially did from a browser, from a terminal? So remember, my kubeconfig is still configured to communicate with Okteto namespace. And I can use it freely. I can do like Helm upgrade, -- install DevOps toolkit, and the directory is Helm, and I want to set ingress enabled equals false, because Okteto will create ingress for me, right? And now I'm working with that remote cluster. I never created the cluster. I mean, I did create the cluster, but not in this case. This is now against Okteto cluster, so I can do it from browser, like what I did initially, and then click the deploy button, what's not, or remotely by Okteto namespace, which creates a new temporary namespace, and just Helm upgrade or Helm delete DevOps toolkit, right? I can delete applications, I can create applications, I can upgrade application, I can do more or less almost everything that I would normally do by creating my own cluster, but this time I got cluster instantly so that I don't really need to worry about the setup. And that's all there is to it. It's simple tool. I like simple tools, and there is no need to make it complicated if it does exactly what I need. And what I need in this case is to get namespaces instantly for my work. And that's exactly what I got. So that's all there is to it. Okteto allows us to get instant cluster or a segment of a cluster without really knowing much about Kubernetes. And it allows us to synchronize our local source code with that cluster in case we want to work remotely. Now, two things, but not both of them equally good, right? Getting instant cluster, absolutely awesome, amazing, I love it. Having remote work environment where I can write code and synchronize it, not so good. Gitpod is a much better solution. The link to Gitpod, it's in the description. Both Gitpod and Okteto are doing similar stuff, but approaching it from different angles. And maybe if we combine both of them, we can get the right thing. We can use Gitpod to get replacement for laptops, to get whatever we need in a laptop available from a browser running somewhere else. And we can use Okteto to get instant clusters where we can deploy stuff. Gitpod doesn't give us cluster. It gives us work environment, but not an environment where we would deploy Kubernetes applications. A single application, yes. A whole something defined as Kubernetes Helm customized, not that good with Gitpod. On the other hand, remote replacement for a laptop, with IDE and synchronization of files and Git support, not so good with Okteto. So they complement each other. What matters for now is that you should think of Okteto as instant cluster, instant development namespace where you can do whatever you need and then delete it when you don't need it anymore. That's it. No fuss, easy, cluster accessible to anybody or segment of a cluster. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. You probably did, right? If you haven't, don't be shy, subscribe and click the like button. Likes are important for YouTube algorithm and for me and what's not. Until then, have a good day, have a good night, wherever you are, and see you next time. Cheers.